The HOA actually called the cops on me, all over my lawn. What happened next shocked everyone. It started with a simple complaint about grass length. I laughed at first, thinking they were bluffing, but then things escalated fast. Within hours, a patrol car was in my driveway. I tried explaining it was just a few inches of overgrowth, but they kept insisting there was a violation. Neighbors peeked out, whispering, and the HOA rep showed up in full authority mode. My heart raced as I realized this wasn't about grass anymore. It was about control. I still remember that morning like it was yesterday. The sun had just started sliding past the rooftops, casting soft, golden light across my yard. My grass had grown a little taller than usual, nothing dramatic. But apparently in this neighborhood, normal was apparently a crime. I didn't even notice it myself. I had been busy fixing the old swing set for my kids, repainting the fence, and trying to plant a few flowers along the edges of the driveway. It was supposed to be a simple weekend project, a few hours of peace. But then that envelope arrived. The HOA's letter wasn't polite. It didn't say, "Please consider trimming your lawn." No, it said, "Your property is in violation. Immediate action required." It was typed, formal, and somehow carried a tone of personal offense, like I had personally insulted every single member of the HOA board. I laughed at first out loud in my kitchen. Surely this was a joke. My neighbors knew me. They knew I took pride in my yard. Surely someone on the board would step in and admit this was petty. Right. Wrong. By the time I finished my coffee, a knock came at the door. Not the usual neighborly wave or casual chat. It was firm, deliberate, almost militaristic. And behind that knock, the tension was palpable. A patrol car was idling at the curb, lights off, just sitting there. My stomach sank. I opened the door. There stood the officer, a blank expression, a badge glinting in the morning sun. Behind him, one of the HOA reps, clipboard in hand, looking like a general overseeing an invasion. I tried to explain. "It's just a few extra inches of grass," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I didn't think it would matter." They didn't care. "Violation," they repeated, the word sharp and unyielding. My neighbors, now out on their porches, whispered among themselves. Some looked sympathetic. Others, I could swear, were smirking, enjoying the spectacle. That's when I realized this wasn't about grass. This was about control, about sending a message. In this neighborhood, everyone obeys or else. As the hours stretched on, the tension grew unbearable. Letters piled up, each more threatening than the last. Warnings, fines, notices of potential legal action. It felt like I was trapped in a slow-motion nightmare. My own driveway had become a stage, my front yard a battlefield. I started noticing little things. Cars slowing down as they passed, neighbors whispering just loud enough for me to hear, the HOA rep taking notes, measuring, calculating, judging. And still, no one explained why my grass mattered so much. Late that evening, after the patrol car had left but the tension hadn't, I stood in my yard, hands on my hips, staring at what had caused all of this. A few blades of grass taller than the rest. And yet it had become a symbol of defiance, a challenge to the unspoken rules of the community. I felt anger, frustration, but also a strange clarity. If this was a battle, I wasn't going to lose quietly, not without a fight. The next morning, I decided to confront it strategically. I researched every single clause in the HOA regulations, cross-checked them with city codes, and prepared myself for confrontation. When the HOA rep arrived that day, clipboard again in hand, I met him at the edge of the lawn. Calm, composed, armed with facts. I walked him through every point, every technicality, every loophole. He frowned, muttered under his breath, took notes, and yet nothing changed. The warning letters kept coming, escalating in severity. Neighbors started getting involved, but not in the way I expected. Some sided with the HOA, whispering about setting examples and keeping standards. Others approached me quietly, offering small words of encouragement, warnings, and even little tips for staying within the system. One neighbor, older, kind-eyed, slipped me a note. Sometimes rules are just excuses for control. Don't let them own you. I held onto that note like a lifeline. Then came the day the cops returned. Not one patrol car this time, but two. I tried to remain calm, but my pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. The HOA rep didn't even attempt to hide his satisfaction. "We're just doing our job," he said. I knew better. This was personal. And that's when I decided it was time to escalate, but not like they expected. Instead of arguing, I documented everything. Video, timestamps, notes, interactions, letters. I built a case like a chess master, anticipating their every move, predicting their strategy. Every visit, every threat, every whispered judgment became part of my plan. My kids played in the yard, oblivious to the tension, and that was my fuel. I wasn't just fighting for my lawn, I was fighting for them, for our peace, for the principle that petty power doesn't win. Weeks passed, the back and forth continued. Then one afternoon, the climax came. I had scheduled a neighborhood meeting, ostensibly to discuss community improvements. Everyone showed up: the HOA board, neighbors, a few curious onlookers. I walked in calmly, carrying a folder thick with evidence, facts, and carefully documented incidents. I laid it out point by point, showing the absurdity of their enforcement, the inconsistencies, the personal biases. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some faces turned red. Others, shocked, whispered among themselves. And then came the twist. The HOA rep, flustered, tried to regain control, but the narrative had shifted. I had turned the table. I wasn't defiant. I was prepared. Every threat, every visit, every attempt to intimidate me had been catalogued. Their power, once looming and terrifying, now seemed small, petty, almost ridiculous. The room held its breath as I concluded my presentation. Silence, then murmurs, then finally acknowledgement. They couldn't find me, they couldn't enforce anything without exposing themselves. And in that moment, the entire power dynamic changed. Neighbors came up afterward, offering congratulations, shaking hands, sharing quiet laughter. Some admitted they'd been afraid to speak up before. Some admitted they'd supported the HOA blindly. I realized then that this story wasn't just about a lawn. It was about autonomy, fairness, and the courage to stand up when systems try to crush individuality. My lawn remained slightly overgrown, but every blade now felt like a flag of victory. By the end of it, the story spread. Online, offline, whispered in passing. People marveled at how one person could turn the tables on a controlling HOA, how a simple act of self-respect could escalate into a full-blown narrative of resistance. And me. I sat in my yard watching my kids play, sipping coffee and smiling. The battle was over, the lesson learned. And yet, I knew that in this neighborhood, stories like this never truly end. They evolve, they simmer, they become legends of subtle power, of quiet defiance, of what happens when ordinary people refuse to be intimidated. So if you ever think a few blades of grass don't matter, remember this story. Because sometimes it's the little things, the things that seem small, insignificant, that ignite the biggest changes. And if you want to see more stories where ordinary people take back control from petty authorities, hit subscribe and stay tuned. You won't want to miss what happens next.